You don't buy coffee, right?
We do not buy coffee. We try to set up spaces where industry can meet producers with traders, with roasters. We try to elevate the profile of, who are coffee farmers, what are some of their challenges. And in my opinion, a hugely important conversation that we need to have in a much more direct and serious way is, as an industry, do we care about our own future? Because the way we're driving things, honestly, it makes coffee production and export almost impossible.
This episode is proudly brought to you by Mapper Forward's workshop, It's Time to Become a Coffee Consultant. Learn how to diversify your revenue streams and create freedom from your day job while saying goodbye to that alarm clock forever by becoming a consultant within the coffee industry or directly to consumers who have shifted towards home brewing and home roasting. Protect your income from challenging times in the coffee value chain by taking this course today. Go to mapperforward.coffee/workshops or click the link in the show notes for details. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 1 of a brand new 5-part series with Monika Firl from Fairtrade International. Monika, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Lee. It's really a pleasure to be here.
I am beyond excited for this conversation. There's a couple of things that I want to say before we start this conversation, folks. First of all, a few people have asked me why we're having this conversation with Fairtrade International. And I want you to know that it was not me who reached out to Fairtrade International to have this conversation. It was actually Fairtrade who reached out to me, which to me is a statement of courage. Because everybody knows this is a podcast where we have unedited conversations about real shit. And so for somebody to come to me and say, hey, we want to have a conversation about what's going on with Fairtrade, that's a real statement of courage to me, because I'm not the kind of person who's going to sit here and, let's have a conversation about Fairtrade and make it all shiny and everything. That's not what we do at Mapper Forward. And so I want you to know that this is going to be a real conversation. And Monika, I really appreciate the fact that we had a conversation about what we're going to discuss. And you were like, no, I want to talk about all these things that we've decided that we're going to talk about. And I want to be vulnerable about it. And I want us to talk very plainly about what's happening. So first of all, I want to say that I appreciate that. Second of all, folks, success for me at the end of this series is that you take whatever biases or preconceived notions that you have about what Fairtrade is, and you just stay open to the idea that things may be a little more complex than you've been led to believe, and I hope that you listen with curiosity. That is the intention that I am bringing to this conversation. Curiosity. I am here to learn and listen and ask questions because I'm confused about a whole bunch of things. I have conversations with producers and with traders and with buyers and with consumers, and they are confused. And so for me, when Fairtrade said, can we have a conversation with you on the podcast? I went, yeah, because I want to understand some stuff. And the whole ethos of what we do here is we lean in with curiosity so that we hope that you will do the same thing too in your everyday life when you engage people who are doing things that you don't quite understand. So in this series, our theme is who is Fairtrade International in 2024, specifically in coffee. Fairtrade does a whole bunch of stuff, but we are specifically talking about coffee. And in this episode, we're talking about what Fairtrade International is in 2024. So Monika, tell us what role you play in Fairtrade and what Fairtrade does so that those who don't quite understand have some context.
Sure. So I'm the senior advisor of coffee in Fairtrade International. And, essentially Fairtrade is bringing together the supply chain with producers, roasters, national Fairtrade promoting organizations, and trying to set some rules of engagement and promoting farmer-led benefits, pricing, relationship building, and more economic and social justice for farmers in the coffee industry. We'll stick with coffee. So my role, essentially, we are the interfacing, trying to bring these pieces together, keep communications flowing. My job in particular, it's a lot of industry-facing conference presentations. Also, the last 10 years in coffee, I've been very focused on climate change in coffee. And so, our whole push to encourage a transition to more ecological agroecology, agroforestry, production systems. Those are all like my biggest passions. Excellent. But I have other teammates as well who are doing, sort of the internal communications, updating standards, and all the different work that goes into keeping this system up to date, compliant, and moving forward with what industry and the world is demanding of us. And all the while trying to keep, not keep an eye out for farmers, because farmers are co-owners of this system. So working with farmers and helping to keep their voice elevated in the many challenges and solutions that we're trying to propose in coffee.
And you haven't been doing this for 5 minutes, right?
Yes. So I've been in this position for the last 2.5 years, but it's coming up soon on my 30th anniversary in coffee. I started, joined with actually first generation coffee producer organizations in Mexico in the mid 90s. Moved there, and I spent 6 years working with farmer organizations. And a lot of that also was farmer to farmer learning exchanges. From there I met people who wanted to set up a North American roaster collective to buy direct and fair and organic and quality from small farmers. And when I moved to Canada, they invited me to join their team. So I did that as a startup for close to 20 years. Went through as a green buyer, as a sustainability director, setting up our quality control lab, and voila, here I am.
Here you are. And that's the part that a lot of people forget. Like, these organizations have these world-renowned names, right? Behind that brand are people who are taking actions, people who are representing things, people who are doing things. You are somebody who's heading up coffee, right? Working in coffee in Fairtrade. So if we're going to understand the person who's working in Fairtrade and helping to make decisions and helping to direct things, what's your head and your heart and values? Like, what is it that drives you to do coffee like this? Coffee farmers, for sure. I definitely got a crash course in the imbalance in the industry, and especially not just the imbalance in the industry, but also I have seen astounding transformation in the coffee industry in these past almost 3 decades in a really good way, but we still have a long way to go. But I have this sort of very deeply seated sensibility to hypocrisy and just seeing the unnecessary levels of injustice makes me crazy. That is why I moved to Central America. I spent 4 years in El Salvador before being invited to join the coffee co-ops in Chiapas. And I see things, and I see that there's work to be done, and it's all so possible. But it takes bringing together. My background's actually in journalism, and my tasks tend in coffee to always come back around to, I feel this deep desire to do what we can to make information and experience and knowledge available to people who need it, and not try to hold knowledge as a weapon. And so the reason I ask you that question is because a lot of the time we lose sight of the fact that there's people who are involved in these things. There are people that are driving these conversations, and those people have agendas, and they have hearts, and they have intentions. And I think it's important. I certainly want to know, and I've thought about it before you and I met, who's the person at Fairtrade who actually gets to make these decisions about coffee? And go ahead, please.
I will just say that is not a person. That is a very complex web of people and voices. Right. And yeah.
So can you explain that to us? If we're talking about what is Fairtrade International in 2024 when it comes to coffee, what does that web look like?
Well, there is a lot of interaction, consultation. First of all, we have the producer networks. So, it's the producer networks from Latin American, Caribbean, from Asia Pacific, and from Africa and Middle East. And they have a huge say. They own half of the organization. They are in all of the decision-making bodies. And when we are proposing something, or sometimes we are reacting to something that's been imposed on the coffee industry, and we need to find ways to be compliant, the first thing we have to do is check in with the producers, and the producers give their opinion, their proposals. We also need to see how that flies with industry, and how we're going to communicate that to consumers. So it's quite a process, which is why sometimes change can take some time. But I'd say one of the things that's quite different about fair trade, and I would say maybe every other cause, sort of ethics, sustainable related coffee initiative, is that decisions we make must be written into our standards. Those standards then are the basis of an audit and certification process. So what we say on paper actually gets translated into an inspection in the field. So this creeps this balance of, aspiring to be rock solid at the same time with external expectations, but at the same time knowing that there is a reality on the ground, and that our rules and regulations could mean the difference between producers being able to stay in the system and being forced out of the system. So all that to say, we have to make theoretical desire and farmer reality fit together. And that's not always simple, because there are a lot of expectations. And there's a long wish list of what everyone thinks, coffee and coffee farmers and industry should be doing. And not all of it adds up.
Whose expectations get the highest priority?
Well, like I say, it's trying to bring all of that into balance. But ultimately, we exist to support farmers. So if what we're doing is detrimental to farmers, then we need to reel back. So it kind of keeps you constantly in this ebb and flow of the reality is changing around us very quickly. And many of those changes and shifts aren't us driving, but us sometimes being driven in directions. And how can we make that fit within the needs and expectations of farmers and their organizations as well?
And how agile can Fairtrade be when things need to move quickly? Because it sounds like there's quite some bureaucracy involved.
There are a lot of steps along the way. And some things are much simpler to move forward faster. And some things take quite a bit of time. You may have noticed last year we launched an increase in the minimum price. And that was, in that itself, it's the same kind of balancing act where farmers need better pricing. We all know that. Industry is pushing back, saying consumers won't pay it. And Yet, when that mysterious C market rises, everyone scrambles to meet that price, right?
Yeah.
And so in 2022, the price was high for quite some time. It's okay. This is the time we need to get a consultation going. What's the right price? And that in and of itself took quite a bit of time. By the time, and then the number that people came up with after more than 10 years of not shifting a minimum price safety net, which was at $1.40, was bumping it up to $1.80. And at the time, the market price was still above $1.80. But soon after that was launched, the market dipped down, which was kind of an interesting experience in the sense that you saw who's who in fair trade, and it's like, you don't necessarily want just the fair weather friends. You want people who are truly understanding that, just because market price dipped does not mean that a farmer's cost of production went down. In fact, especially in the specialty coffee industry, where there are so many expectations on quality and reporting and in all kinds of additional services, that also requires investments. And often those are long-term investments. Those aren't short-term investments. Mm-hmm. So for a farmer to put their organizations out there, and then the price goes down and suddenly they're being penalized after having done everything that's being demanded of them. It was like that's partially what the minimum price safety net attempts to protect against. So anyway, there was that dip. Now, as we know, price is back up again. So price is not the driving conversation right now in fair trade. It's many other things.
Fundamentally, what does fair trade do?
Fundamentally, well, what we're trying to do is to raise awareness amongst consumers, industry in particular, about this need to rebalance trade, mm-hmm. make trade fairer, and to support farmers in elevating their voice and their presence in this decision-making process.
And what don't you do? Like, what do you think is out there in the market that people think you do that you don't do?
We don't negotiate contracts for people. We don't, I know we're going to be getting into a couple of different areas a little bit later on, but, we cannot solve all of the world's problems. Mm-hmm.
You don't buy coffee, right?
We do not buy coffee. We try to set up spaces mm-hmm. where industry can meet producers with traders, with roasters. We try to elevate the profile of who are coffee farmers, what are some of their challenges. And in my opinion, a hugely important conversation that we need to have in a much more direct and serious way is, as an industry, mm-hmm. do we care about our own future? Because the way we're driving things, honestly, it makes coffee production and export almost impossible. I would mm-hmm. say I have worked very closely with coffee farmer organizations, and I know, all the steps that it takes, not just to, get coffee on a boat, but get coffee on the tree, then get coffee off the tree, yep. And get that delivered when and how a roaster or a trader wants it, is always challenging. But now you add on all these additional elements, like the irregularity, like the climate crises, the new of, all of the bioterrorism regulations, all of the shifts in organic certification, these new norms that people are needing to scramble to get themselves set up for, mm-hmm. and to not financially resource organizations to be in a position to be able to do this is making it like a small miracle that coffee can actually be delivered. And, that the industry doesn't see that itself. It's quite astounding that maybe the industry is seeing this, but not necessarily acting like we're seeing it,
I can tell you the industry doesn't see it. And the reason I can tell you that the industry doesn't see, and there's a really good reason for it. It's a shitty reason, but it's a viable reason. The barrier to entry to own a business on the consuming end of the market, whether it's a roastery or it's a cafe, the barrier to entry is very low. We don't need people to understand how the supply chain works. We don't need them to understand how coffee's grown. We don't really need them to understand anything. There are too many middlemen in between them and the producer that will protect them from needing to ever have read a contract or to understand how it's produced or any of those kinds of things. And because of that, they're in a very privileged position where they just go to an importer and they start their business by buying spot coffee.
Right.
And now spot coffee is going away, right?
Yeah, and it is actually has been quite surprising to me to know people, good people, interesting people, but who have spent their lifetime in coffee and have the very, very slightest idea about what it takes to grow coffee. So and those are the things, how to bridge these gaps of understanding and worldview and bring people together to understand we are all on the same team.
Yeah.
That we are trying to make this business work, but for us in particularly work, and for me, very much so in particular, make this work for farmers.
And the hope that the thing that I hope that people take away from this whole series is this is complex and complicated. And given the forces that are fucking with our value chain right now, to be honest, it is bringing more of the challenges. It is bringing more tension in, and I guess more. It is bringing the dysfunctional behavior to the top. It is It is making people more aware that the scapegoats that they used to participate in are no longer existing. And perhaps people are using those opportunities to blame Fairtrade or to blame a lot of other actors. We're here to talk about Fairtrade, so let's keep it on that. And so this is why I'm curious about exploring it. Like we're going to, I know a lot of people want us to talk about combo contracts. I want you to know we are going to talk. We have a whole episode.
We'll get there.
A whole episode has been put aside for combo contracts. And that should tell you that Fairtrade did not come to this conversation to be all like rainbows and sunshine. Fairtrade seems to be very aware that shit is broken and not everything's going well. And what I want people to understand is we are in a world of hurt in this industry and we need to start working together to try and come up with solutions together, because the people who sort of are responsible for the trade in our industry don't seem to be making the headways that are necessary. And I've lost quite a lot of confidence in their ability to do that. So here we are. So
I also think we need to remind ourselves that we don't step up to this with a perfect recipe and a pathway, all sort of like paved forward for us. This has been an experiment. Maybe to talk about who we are in 2024, we should give a quick snapshot of where we came from.
Please go ahead.
And so it was on the heels of dismantling the International Coffee Agreement and that dramatic price crash that followed that, now iconic Dutch priest Frans van der Hoef and a couple of his colleagues back in the Netherlands in development got together and with this common vision and profound belief that coffee trade could be fairer and came up with a label that was going to help distinguish a product on a mainstream grocery store shelf, and that was communicating and vetting to consumers that in this bag, you have coffee where a farmer got a fairer deal, that they're organized in democratically structured cooperatives, and that extra earning is going towards projects or initiatives that are actually improving farmers' lives in their communities. And it was this whole experiment was based on the belief that consumers would actually care about that. care about the working conditions of coffee farmers and the future of coffee. And they were right. The Dutch consumers responded very enthusiastically. And the concept of bringing this cause coffee to mainstream grocery shelves served, sort of motivated others. Germany was quick to jump on that afterwards. And then soon we had another dozen or so European countries with their own offices promoting very similar, maybe a slightly different messaging, different labels. And over time, it was starting to show that maybe there was duplication and there was creating some confusion in the market. So in the mid-90s, the wheels were already turning to bring these separate entities together under sort of a federation of fair trade. And they're bringing a common label, common messaging, more systematic rules of engagement, and setting the standards, and then this oversight with a third-party certification agency. Coffee farmers at that time, of course, were hungry for this kind of support, and they quickly lined up to show their compliance to the basic premises of fair trade. And and so the concept went live, and it was beginning to make some ripples in the coffee industry. And I get it that when things are moving in what seems to be stable direction, people don't like disruption, but sometimes disruption is necessary. In fact, often disruption is necessary. So, fair trade was starting to get some traction. And then sort of the next, but it was still sort of like the Northerners wanting to do something good for the farmers in the South. And maybe 12 years ago, there was like kind of the next step in evolution where it's like, no, we need to guarantee producer presence and voice in our decision making. And that's when the organization was restructured again, bringing in the 50% ownership of farmer organizations. So they are driving the conversations. They have a 50% vote, but I can tell you they are driving the conversations around any changes that have to do with standards, the criteria, certification, and tone and prioritizing actions. So I guess what I'm trying to say with all of this is that, fair trade is a living, breathing organism. It's a kind of a constant work in progress, and we do have the best intentions to adapt and improve our approach as the context around us shift. And lately, seem to be shifting all the time. So, it does keep you on your toes. And like you were saying earlier, then with every shift, there is this kind of, little bit of teeter-totter or tug of war on what's the perfect balance. And because we do have, we're trying to bring a lot of different interests to sit around the same table and agree, and that it be functional. So,
right. And in the next episode, folks, we're going to be talking about the distance between language and action for fair trade. And so now that we've got the landscape of all of that, and we know what fair trade's intention is behind what they're doing in coffee, we're going to start exploring where the language and the action come into all of this. So join us for that conversation. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, friends. Please don't forget to show us some love by subscribing, liking, commenting, and most of all, sharing this podcast with your friends. Check the show notes for links, including our sponsors and our Patreon, and stay tuned for more great conversations on the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward.